Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Mike, I didn't think I was going to make it this week.
What was wrong, Wendy?
It was touch and go. I seem to have caught some horrible form of the plague.
Oh, no. Do you have rats in the house? Isn't that...
I do, yes. They're running around and
I'm wondering
what germs everywhere.
What those strange boils on your face was. I wasn't sure. And now we know you have the plague. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
No, I had that nasty cold flu thing that everybody's been getting. And for a while, my voice was gone completely.
Uh-oh.
It returned, thankfully, in time for our show on Sunday.
Good. Yeah,
but,
we had a nice time playing on Sunday.
Yeah, and in time for this conversation that we're having. But for a while, I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to talk.
Oh, we had a celebrity. I mean, Baltimore's in the news this week for everything going, but we had a celebrity run-in on Sunday because the show we played at, Tristan Wilds from The Wire, set in Baltimore, was at the show we played at on Sunday. And... he played the character of Michael in the last couple seasons of The Wire, and I was excited about that. I watched the entirety of The Wire.
Okay, I'd never watched that yet, so.
And it's great. It's definitely worth seeing. It brings up a lot of... It's a show with, a predominantly African-American cast. It's like the only major show that's ever really had a predominantly African... Like, through its entire run, it's really fantastic. So that was a special treat. He's like, hey, the dude from The Wire's here. And he's like a badass on The Wire. So I was like, yeah. So that was fun. And anyway, so we had a good show, Brush with Celebrity. Wendy almost died. And today is a big show for us on See on the Other Side. It
sure is.
Because we have a special exclusive interview with some newsmakers here talking about Roswell.
That's awesome.
And this is a special episode for anybody that doesn't know the full story about Roswell. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to know the full story about Roswell, but this is going to be a primer for those of you guys who are interested in it. And then we're going to get an interview with Don Schmitt, who's an investigator and who's part of the Roswell smoking gun presentation that's taking place in Mexico City on Cinco de Mayo.
And there's been a lot of hype for that. I remember one of the guests that we had on, was it Mark O'Connell that was talking about that? So
and Mark O'Connell actually, funny enough, there's controversy surrounding Don Schmitt, who we talked to today, and we'll get into that. Okay. We'll get into that a little later. He's a guy that I've met before. I've interviewed him before, and some of his things are very consistent and very interesting. Some of them aren't. But we talked to him today, and he's a really cool guy.
Awesome.
And he's part of this thing next week. So we're going to give you a preview of that with an exclusive interview with Don Schmitt at the end of the episode. But first of all, let's talk about Roswell. A great place to talk about Roswell is Twitter, where you can find us at Other Side Talk.
Yes, and I have a little question for everybody. If you're listening right now, I just want to ask you to do us a favor, if you'd be so kind, and just send a tweet to us telling us what you're doing right now as you're listening to the show, because we're curious who's out there, who's listening, what you're doing, what you like to do while you listen to us. So if you're exercising or if you're if you're driving, don't
if you're driving, I want you to stop with like one hand on the wheel, one hand on the phone. And
you can dictate, but
right, yeah, you can dictate. Anyway.
No, but just at Other Side Talk, and then I'm juggling 4 zucchinis while riding a unicycle and listening to your show.
If that was the first thing you thought of, Wendy, like
what? That's what I do when I listen to podcasts.
Maybe you shouldn't be talking to me, and maybe you should be talking to a professional.
You don't do that while you're listening to podcasts?
I don't juggle a lot of zucchini.
Part of my morning routine.
Right? Okay, go through it. Okay. And I don't have a unicycle. I'm bad enough on a bicycle. I'm bad enough on a car.
It's only one wheel. One, fewer wheel to worry about.
You're right. I encourage, if you're on a unicycle right now, please tweet pick us.
Yes.
Twit pick.
Yes, twit pick.
I don't even know if twit pick is still around.
Just a picture on Twitter now.
Yeah. Just a pick on Twitter. Anyway, so that's a great place to talk about Roswell, Twitter. And let's start from the beginning.
All right.
When it comes to, because
it's a good place to start.
Really, that is the most famous UFO incident in United States history. Like that is, I think, it's right at the beginning of flying saucer mania when this happens. And so you go back to 1947. There's a guy named Kenneth Arnold, and he's a private pilot, and he works for the U.S. Forest Service, or the U.S. He works for the United States government, but so he's not some crazy guy. He's flying around Mount Rainier up in the American Northwest, the mighty, beautiful Pacific Northwest. Mm-hmm. And it's not raining that day, I guess. Anyway, so he says what he sees is like a pie plate or a disc. And this is June 24th, 1947, and he sees a pie plate and like it's popping fresh in the sky. He sees a pie
Jiffy
plate.
Pop.
Yeah, it's a Jiffy. So he's got a Jiffy Pop in the sky, and that's what he sees.
Okay.
And he reports that, and then all of a sudden, I mean, it's in the Seattle like Post-Intelligencer.
So he's the only one who saw it.
But he was flying.
Oh, okay.
And,
so he had a vantage point that.
But this is the first report of a flying saucer. And this is, I mean, newspapers start taking up a story. The guy sees a crazy flying saucer.
Yeah, a Jiffy Pop in the air.
And, okay, we're 2 years after the end of the Second World War. And so a lot of pilots had seen weird stuff in the sky during the Second World War. I mean, and they called them, what'd they call them?
Unidentified flying objects?
Not yet. That didn't come out until 1952. They called them Foo Fighters.
Oh. I missed my cue.
Hey.
Okay.
So that's what they called them, Foo Fighters. And some people think that it was a like German special like flying mine. Mm-hmm. That was like they always come up with this crazy science fiction technology that the Germans had. And so that's it. The Foo Fighters were just this crazy German flying mine. And the term UFO wasn't created until 1952 when they were looking for something. I mean, it fits like Foo Fighters. I think UFO, like they would have done it right after.
You see something that you don't know what it is. It's unidentified.
Right. And it's flying.
And guess what it is?
It's an object.
An object of some sort.
Yeah. So, but as far as the flying saucer craze, like it was in all the newspapers, and this is June of 1947 that this happens. Okay. Now, saucer-shaped craft, this isn't the first time that there's already in science fiction from the 1930s. I mean, but most people thought when they thought of spaceships, they thought of Flash Gordon rockets or that, trip to the moon movie from like 1910 or 1912. They think of rockets. They don't think of saucers flying in the sky. And so it's only a couple weeks later when a guy named William Mack Brazel, he's a foreman working on a crew, and he's working on out this ranch outside of Roswell, New Mexico. And he finds some weird debris, what he describes as a large area of bright wreckage made up of rubber strips, tinfoil, rather tough paper, and sticks. He was describing this weird debris he finds out in the fields in Roswell, New Mexico. Okay. And he doesn't think much of it until a couple weeks later. July 7th, so this is just, this shortly after what Kenneth Arnold saw at the flying saucer, first time. A couple weeks later, he reports to the sheriff saying, I think I might have found a flying saucer. All right. Now, this wouldn't be that big of a deal, but it made the newspaper, and it was like, hey, flying saucer crashed in Roswell, New Mexico.
Yeah, that'd be crazy.
Right. And the Air Force comes out, and the Air Force, they have they send out like an announcement about it. And here's what it says. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chaves County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. That's their official thing.
So it's like a press release or whatever.
Their press release is that they found a flying saucer. The press release is not that they found a weather balloon.
Yeah, right. Or just debris that they didn't recognize or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, no. It was like a balloon from the mall. Like, it was from Party City or whatever. No. Or Spencer Gifts. It was not. This is not from Spencer Gifts. They said we found a flying saucer, and that was the official line. And so that's why people were like, holy crap, they found a flying saucer. So then what happens is a guy named Jesse Marcel, he's working for the military, and he features in later on. Jesse Marcel is a military officer. He comes to get the debris from the trash site, from the crash site, not the trash site.
Well, there was a lot of debris trash.
Yes. But so, I mean, Jesse Marcel is later interviewed in his life, and he comes out and he's the one who was really saying like, this wasn't a weather balloon. He says the material found was quote unquote nothing of this earth. Okay. So he describes it, but the thing is, the story kind of dies down for a while after the initial
shock and awe.
Yeah, that they're like, oh my God, because the Air Force later on says, oh no, it was just a weather balloon. It wasn't a flying saucer. And then the story kind of dies. And it kind of stays alive in UFO conspiracy theories for the next, but it doesn't really enter the public imagination again until the 1980s. A guy writes a book called The Roswell Incident. And they call this the first version of the story. And this is, he says he talks to people in interviews that lightning struck the UFO, it crashes, all the aliens died at the scene or whatever, and then they just came and picked him up. And so he releases this book, The Roswell Incident, in 1980. Well, okay, so you remember Unsolved Mysteries?
Yep.
Yeah. And Unsolved Mysteries, I think we've talked about it on the show before. Right, we all like Ron Robert Stack. The guy, and he had a trench coat on.
And you're a kid, it's terrifying too, because you're sure you're going to get abducted or,
right, or
vanish in the night.
The recreations of like haunted toys, the haunted Toys R Us and stuff. I mean, we'll talk about the haunted Toys R Us sometime. But so in 1989, Unsolved Mysteries does a story on Roswell based on this guy's book, The Roswell Incident. And that's one of their little, vignettes. So a guy named Glenn Dennis sees it on Unsolved Mysteries, and he calls in and he says, well, not just was there an alien crash, but he was there for the alien autopsy.
Oh my gosh.
So this is the first, we're starting to get eyewitness events 35 years after it happens.
And no longer just of a saucer, but actual creatures.
Right, actual alien bodies.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so he gets into it.
Nasty.
And then we get into Don Schmitt, who we interview in a little bit, and he's a Wisconsin guy. He and another guy named Kevin Randall go in and they start doing the investigation, and they start talking to these witnesses. They talk to Glenn Dennis. He becomes one of the foundation of their book, UFO Crash at Roswell. And so UFO Crash at Roswell is like the second version of the story, and it gets in deeper. Like people are saying that President Eisenhower saw the bodies and everything. So this goes from just being, a UFO crash to we actually, we examined the bodies, we took them apart. Okay. Right. And so then this gets even deeper. In the 1990s, we have X-Files mania.
And the president's involved, so it's a cover up.
And a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what happens? 1995, alien autopsy video.
I remember that.
Yes, and we remember it. So if you guys weren't around in the 90s.
It was so creepy.
It was hosted by Commander Riker himself, William Frakes. And he goes, alien autopsy. And it was shown on like Fox on like a Friday night or something. I remember, I think I had people over.
It was like a live thing.
Right. And we watched the alien autopsy video. And there was a London-based guy that said he had, he'd gotten the footage from a shady character and everything. And they'd gotten this old, from 1947 in New Mexico. And it was the Roswell bodies being taken apart. And it's a little bit gruesome and it's fuzzy and it's hard to see.
And it's pretty creepy.
Yeah, it is pretty creepy. And then it's like, everyone's like, do you think it's real? And I'm like, well, you think the government would allow this to be shown
right.
on Fox?
Like prime time.
Right. If it was real. I mean, Ray Santilli a few years later, he eventually came out and said, well, most of the alien autopsy video was recreated. He said it, but it was based on lost footage. So he's still holding on to his old BS.
Yeah.
And about this time, this is when we get into some of the controversy we deal with when we talk about Don Schmitt. He is working for the Center for UFO Studies as opposed to the Mutual UFO Network, which are the two main UFO research organizations in the country. So we interviewed Mark O'Connell. he's an investigator for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. And so Don Schmitt was one of the higher up people at the Center for UFO Studies. He'd worked with J. Allen Hynek, who Mark's writing a book about. And anyway, I guess the controversy was that Don wasn't entirely honest about his credentials.
Oh, okay.
You know, he said he had like a degree that he didn't have.
I see.
And people started to question some of his
people
started to question some of his research because of that. Like, did he conduct the research? He said an assistant did some research. And that, you know, some of that happened, and that caused a split with the guy he was writing books with, Kevin Randall.
Gotcha.
And there was a bunch of controversy in the 1990s for it.
Interesting.
So, I mean, Don's, I think, you know, he worked to recover his reputation, you know, through his next books and stuff. Sure. But as far as, you know, he's a nice guy, a very compelling speaker. But, you know, whether you take everything with a grain of salt, I mean, we're talking about UFOs here. Mm-hmm. So we take everything with a grain of salt.
Yeah,
you
gotta.
But we talk about the pop culture references to Roswell at the time. I mean, in the 1990s, Independence Day.
Oh my gosh.
So Independence Day, Judd Hirsch plays, who's the guy from Jeff Goldblum's father in Independence Day. And, you know, he says to the president, he goes, "You knew about this." And Judd Hirsch is the lead, he's the lead character from Taxi. If you remember Taxi, Judd Hirsch is the main character on Taxi. He's a great actor. And he's like, "You knew about this. They crashed in the 1940s in New Mexico." And he says that right to him, you know. Mm-hmm. And so Roswell's referenced in that movie. There's a Showtime movie made. We talk with Don about that because Don wrote the book. His book, The UFO Crash at Roswell, is the basis of the Showtime movie Roswell, which was nominated for Best TV Film at the Golden Globes. Stars Kyle MacLachlan, Martin Sheen.
That's impressive.
It's a great movie.
Cool.
It's a great movie. And he talks about the production of that movie in the interview and like how it got optioned and the whole process they went to get made. And it's really interesting. Like, he was supposed to be the original script was about the investigators. And so he would have been one of the lead characters, which I thought was neat. So moving on. So we have that. Eventually the WB makes a show called Roswell, you know, based on that these are children of the aliens who originally crashed in the 1940s. Sure. And so Roswell just enters the imagination. Yeah. 1997, Bill Clinton even later on says that he asked the people in the Air Force about it.
Oh, wow.
He's interviewed.
Well, wouldn't you if you were the president?
I mean, yeah, I would. I mean,
I'd want to know.
And he's interviewed later on when Hillary is running for president, and he's doing some press for Hillary, and the radio guy's like, "President Clinton, tell us about Roswell." And he goes, "You know, it's funny enough." I mean, my Bill Clinton's horrible. He's like, "Yeah, I did back in the 50th anniversary of 1997." I don't even know what that sounds like. He goes, "But I guess, you know, it was just a weather balloon." And then, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Right, of course he's going to say that. Keep talking, Slick Willie.
Well, yeah.
And the Air Force comes out that year too and says that the reason that was a big cover-up is because the weather balloon was called Project Mogul. And Project Mogul was designed to take readings on where Soviet missiles were.
Ah, okay.
So the idea was they said it was a flying saucer because they didn't want the Soviets to know
it's
that.
It's better to hide it through some fantastic.
Right. Oh yeah, it's aliens, man.
Sure.
So, you know,
Interesting.
the 50th anniversary of Roswell, they did have. I mean, the government made some official statements on it. A few years later, Bill Richardson, he's a congressman from New Mexico. He's looking to run for president and things like that. Mm-hmm. He says a direct quote that when he investigated and he said he was told the documents were classified. And Bill Richardson's a Democrat. He goes, "That ticked me off. The government doesn't tell the truth as much as it should on a lot of issues," and promised once he was president, he would investigate it further. John Podesta, Bill Clinton's chief of staff. He's working on like a documentary on the Sci-Fi Channel. He's a total UFO nut.
Awesome.
And he says it's time for the government to classify records that are more than 25 years old and to provide scientists with data that will assist in determining the true nature of the phenomena. So
he knows something that we don't,
right.
and he
So
wants it out.
John Podesta, he's really into this stuff, and he always makes X-Files jokes on his Twitter account and stuff like that.
Oh, that's cool.
And so he's the guy I think we'll have to turn to if we ever want disclosure of the truth.
Maybe we can get him as a guest sometime.
Oh God, we'll see. Maybe when Hillary runs, maybe John Podesta will help out trying to get the
word out.
paranormal crowd.
There you go. You never know.
Actually, he might try to get the paranormal crowd. That you gotta win somehow.
Hey, be an interesting.
So
angle.
the last real interesting Roswell thing that came out was a few years ago. A woman named Annie Richardson wrote a book on Area 51, and she said she'd interviewed all these people that had worked at the Air Force Base, Groom Lake in Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got this one weird chapter where they talk about whoever crashed at Roswell, New Mexico.
Uh-huh.
And one of the scientists had told her that the Soviets had gotten Dr. Joseph Mengele, he was the Nazi terror. He'd experiment on people. He did sick experiments on twins and on the concentration camp victims. I mean, he is the 20th century mad scientist. When you would say that he's a Nazi mad scientist. And after the war, they said that the Soviets got him, and they wanted to use him to make grotesque and childlike aviators, like alien-looking.
Oh.
So you perform experiments on children or whatever, 12-year-olds, large heads and abnormally shaped, oversized eyes. And they would get them in a small craft, have them crash in the United States, and it would create a War of the Worlds type panic where we think the United States would all of a sudden become destabilized because we thought we were being invaded by aliens.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And so she was on a whole bunch of talk shows coast to coast and everything like that a few years ago to go over that. And so that kind of brings us where we are today.
Okay.
May 5th, Mexico City. They think they say they have the smoking gun on Roswell.
Wow.
And it's these slides from the 1940s, and Don's going to get into that, and he's going to give us a special preview of what people can expect to see.
He knows what they're going to present.
He was the guy that investigated the slides.
Okay.
Like the guy with the slides came to them.
Is he going to be there?
Yes, he's going to be in Mexico City, and
that's cool.
he was part of the investigative team, him and his partner Kevin Carey, and it's hosted by the Mexican Art Bell. That's the guy.
Great.
I mean, I'm sure what they did was that they had these slides, they wanted to put on a big event, and they went to the highest bidder, and it's this guy in Mexico who's putting on this huge paranormal live stream event on Cinco de Mayo, and we're going to have that information is going to be in the show notes, and you can check it out.
Is it going to be live cast on the web? The whole thing?
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a full day of the evidence surrounding it, and Don's a presenter, one of the main presenters because he's a main investigator.
Well, I fully intend to pour myself a margarita and pop that baby on and watch.
Right, you can party in Cinco de Mayo style with the Roswell smoking gun.
Fascinating.
So
cool.
anyway, that's just, if you guys were wondering, just the history of the Roswell UFO crash. That is your Roswell 101. And then let's have our advanced class with the speaker and one of the leading Roswell investigators, Don Schmitt. And we're with Don Schmitt, UFO researcher and author of books like The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, The UFO Crash at Roswell, Witness to Roswell. How you doing today, Don?
I'm kind of Roswelled out, I guess.
Well, I mean, you've been holding the Roswell banner for decades now.
It has become more than just by far a cursory interest, as much as it's become a devotion to finish what we've started. And I always emphasize, Mike, that I was a complete skeptic. When we made that first trip, when we made the decision to actually conduct an independent investigation into the events in 1947, I was completely confident we'd wrap this up in a weekend, that we'd come away with solid proof that it was a balloon or something just as prosaic. And when you actually start to speak to the first-hand witnesses who held the wreckage in their hand, who described the same characteristics from witness to witness, And then you come away thinking, my God, we need to get back down here as soon as possible and talk to more and more of these people.
Well, how did you get involved in that in the first place? Like, I assume you probably were just into UFOs as a kid, or what started the whole thing?
Yeah, as a kid, I had never had an experience, never had a sighting. I was truly fascinated with the Kennedy assassination. Not that there's any connection, but...
That we know of.
Well, yes, I would agree. But I was Christmas shopping with my folks on one occasion, and I happened to come across a book. And my parents could tell you from the age of 6 on, all they ever wanted were books. You know, my brothers, all types of toys. I wanted books. So they let me pick out my books before Christmas. And I happened to catch this book that had words such as whitewash and cover-up all over the title, all over the title page, which were the same words that were thrown out immediately after the Warren report came out.
That's right.
Investigating the Kennedy assassination. But this happened to be about flying saucers of all things. It was the book Flying Saucers, Serious Business by the late Frank Edwards. And my first book on UFOs.
Awesome.
And I read it, and I was beyond captivated. It was, and especially the chapter, Who's Driving, where it got into all the occupant reports from all around the world. And for living out in the country and having grown up, camping under the stars and just always, staring skyward and always just contemplating the possibilities. And I loved it. And it's not that it ever has become, a hobby or even an obsession as much as a scientist, and I'm not a scientist, but I always thought that was the general way of a scientist, being foremost curious about things.
Absolutely.
How does something work? How does something, evolve? How does it survive? How does it fit as far as within our own reality, that type of thing. And that's why I then also realized that why aren't people paying attention to this? Why aren't people of the scientific community actually studying this phenomenon? Because you're talking about potentially the biggest story of the millennium.
Well, yeah, of course.
So then as I went through high school and then thereafter, I went into investigative training because I wanted to become an investigator. I wanted to actually get into the field and look in these cases firsthand. And it was an organization at that time called the Area Phenomena Research Organization, APRO. And it was founded by the late Coro and Jim Lorenzen, who happened to originated here in Wisconsin.
Hey, all right, I like that.
And they, in a few years, they would move the organization down to Tucson, Arizona. But I became their principal investigator here for Wisconsin. And one of my case reports happened to cross the desk of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was not only the consultant to the Air Force Project Blue Book for 19 years, but he then would be the founder and scientific director of the Center for UFO Studies out of Chicago. And Hynek invited me to come down to Chicago to meet with him. And he was more than impressed, I guess, because within a year I became one of his special investigators. And then thereafter I became his director of special investigations. And then I served on the board of directors at the Center for UFO Studies.
Okay.
And I was generally a skeptic. And here we are now, 25 years later, working on this one case that I thought I could explain away in a weekend. And we've interviewed over 600 people. We've had 4 archaeological digs at the debris crash site. We've had 5 best-selling books. We did the Roswell movie. We've done close to 100 documentaries.
Now, real quick,
thousands of interviews.
We should get into the Roswell movie a little bit because I think a lot of our listeners would be super interested in that. How did you get approached originally that they were going to use your book as source material for that?
I had been investigating a case out in Los Angeles for the Center for UFO Studies. And actor Roy Thinnis, who's a dear friend of mine, I've known him for 30 years now.
Sure, from The Invaders, right?
The Invaders, correct. And this producer in Hollywood had a sighting with his 2 children. And he was talking to none other than Robert Wise, who had directed The Day the Earth Stood Still.
And The Haunting,
Wise,
right? Like he's a real genre classic director.
Sound of Music, the first Star Trek movie, West Side Story, and my favorite UFO movie of all time, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Absolutely.
Well, anyway, Roy suggested that, well, I know Roy Finnis very well, and this might be something he'd be interested in looking into. So I forget how Roy called me up, and I said, yeah, go play David Vincent, who was his character in the TV series.
Mm-hmm.
And he loved it. And he sent me a full panoramic view of all the photographs of their vantage point when they saw this dome disc come down over the Pasadena Valley, and all the interviews, and then talking to neighbors, and everything was on tape, and the maps were drawn, and everything. And this was from Roy Finnis. And it was a case of, well, as soon as I'm out there, I'd like to meet these people.
Sure.
Well, it was executive producer of the Roswell movie, Paul Davids. And that is where we struck as far as this instant bond, this rapport of not only the interest in the subject, but as he learned what we were working on at that time, and this is even before we did the first book, UFO Crash at Roswell.
Okay.
And he himself was so fascinated by what we were coming up with that he approached us and asked, can I option the book even before it comes out? And it took us another 4 years and 7 drafts of the script. In fact, even 2 of the scripts had Kevin Randall and myself kind of like the original Scully and Mulder, because we would have been portrayed by actors as the 2 protagonists in that movie. And I would have to, I can sincerely say in our humbleness at that time, we declined. We suggested, no, the story is much bigger than the investigation, bigger than we are. Let's be true to the original event.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you saw as the final version, the Showtime movie Roswell. And then how proud we were when we were nominated also Best Picture for made-for-TV movie.
Yeah, no, it was a real exciting event when that movie came out. I remember I was in high school, and we were just like, how'd we go to our friend's house with Showtime so we could watch the movie about Roswell?
Well, we had the premiere at the Directors Guild in Hollywood, and many of the cast and crew were present, as well as all of the people throughout the industry that were invited as far as to the private screening. And I'll never forget how we're sitting there, and the head of the Directors Guild, he's talking about all the special people involved with the project, and everybody standing up and taking their applause and everything, and all of a sudden he comes to the end and he says, and finally I would like to introduce 2 of the bravest people I have ever heard of. If not for their involvement, this movie would have never been made, and we only wish them all the success in the world in completing their mission. And we're kind of looking around like, who's he talking about? And the next thing, he calls out our names.
That must have been awesome.
It was. And then I think, for the rest of my days, I will regret the fact that when we were nominated Best Picture, and then we were part of the entire group that was invited to the actual award ceremonies, we did not attend. We should have, we could have, but we were in the field working. We were, still, that pumped, that, inspired to get out there and, just keep going after the witnesses.
Well, how do you feel that, so what you guys believed at the time, or your closest, conjectures and where you were in the investigation at the time, how do you feel that the scriptwriter treated your work? Like, how close did they hew to it, and where did they take any liberties where you were like, well, that's really exaggerating the truth, or what you believed was the truth?
Actually, I would say we were very pleased with the overall development of the script. In fact, we were thoroughly involved, again, with Paul Davids. In the 4 years that it took us to finally sell the project to Showtime. Now, keep in mind, we had originally sold the project to HBO.
Okay.
And I will never forget Paul calling me one evening and, just devastated, just telling me, Don, it's over. Michael Fuchs, who was the president of HBO at that time, he was returning from HBO in New York, and he called up from the plane, we're not doing it, kill it, it's too controversial, we're not touching it.
Okay.
And this was after the script had already been accepted, and we were going into casting and pre-production. And so it's like, oh my God, we have to now start from square one. And within the course of a week, we came up with the idea, well, why don't we just take it across the street and go to Showtime? See if they'd be interested. And within 6 months, we had a deal with them. So we've hardly missed a beat. But
and they didn't push for like, we need things to be more, action oriented, or, we need a fist fight with the aliens. Like, they didn't have anything like that?
No. And that's another reason that we were so pleased with it, because it was just high drama. It was just a very well-written script. The dialogue, for example, one of the things that I also was impressed with is that Showtime, in their own conviction to produce this film, that they hired on award-winning playwright Arthur Coppett to do the screenplay. So we'd be flying to New York, meeting with Coppett, and then we would go to L.A. and then meet with Showtime, and this development of the script went back and forth, and the two investigators were entirely part of that development.
Okay.
So it was a wonderful, wonderful situation. And the biggest problem I think we had, there were two. The one was, who would be the central character? It came down to, would it be the intelligence officer, Jesse Marcel, who went out to first investigate the crash, or would it be the rancher, Mac Brazel, who first discovered the crash on the ranch that he supervised back at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we decided on Major Marcel because we could bring in his wife and his son, and then, as you know, his son Jesse Jr. had an interesting involvement at their home, handling and witnessing some of the wreckage.
Right.
And then it was the ending. Well, how do we bring this to a finale? Because it's still a very fluid, ongoing investigation. How do we, bring this to a climax? And I think we also came up with, and it was mostly Paul David's idea again, that if we envision how it would be with a certain deep throat, kind of a throwback even to the Kennedy assassination, and even the way Oliver Stone handled it in JFK.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the character that Martin Sheen played. And he practically, as you remember in the movie at the end, where he's meeting with the Marcel character in that abandoned hangar.
Right.
And he tells him everything. So it's almost like one could imagine in that type of situation. Tells him it's all true. And then Marcel finally says, okay, but what did I see back in that field back in 1947? Why, Jesse, that was just a weather balloon. So he reels him right back in. And Marcel was yelling, no, it wasn't. I know exactly what I held right in my hands. And the deep throat character goes, go right ahead. Tell the world. Tell them everything. You have no proof. And that's the dilemma that not only that we have had, but all of our witnesses have had for all of these decades, all these years.
Well, I thought that was a great way that was a great dramatic way to bring it around to in the movie, because you're not, it's got that mystery aspect, and Martin Sheen is doing what the Donald Sutherland X character from JFK.
Yes. And that the audience can actually sympathize and to some extent even empathize with such witnesses. That something to be true, but there's no way you can prove it. And especially it's something of that magnitude. And how frustrating to live a lifetime knowing and thinking that, well, maybe this year, maybe next year. And that's precisely what they did with Marcel, just be a good soldier, just pose with the substituted weather balloon, and in 5 years it's all going to come out. 10 years, 15, 30 years, he's dying of emphysema. And he realizes it's not coming out.
Well, that brings us to, this month, you say it's all going to come out. People have been talking about this event on Cinco de Mayo as the smoking gun.
Yes.
And you're there, right? Like, you're one of the featured speakers?
We've been working on this now for 3 years. We have we had the good fortune of originally being contacted by the owners of these 2 slides that were part of a collection that even Eastman Kodak, their historians have dated circa 1947, 1949. We know who the photographers were. We will be explaining and demonstrating their history, their involvement, not only with President Eisenhower and his wife Mamie, but also other high-ranking officials from that time. So they traveled in higher circles. We cannot demonstrate how they would have been provided this opportunity, but nonetheless, they were able to take 2 pictures of a body on a glass table. And from all of the scientific analysis, all of the anthropologists, all the pathologists, all the forensic experts, down to a man and woman, they have told us that this is not a human being.
Well, are you guys going to make available like the name like the Kodak expert that you talked to?
Yep. In fact, even the scientists will all be identified. In fact, many of them will be at the event. They will be up on stage, presenting their arguments, their case that this is something beyond, any type of human condition, any type of human malady that has ever been reported or documented. And I know people have been tossing around this notion that it's a mummy, for example. Well, that was the first thing we eliminated years ago. And that is why so much of this, as you put it, has just been rumor and just abject speculation, trying to basically just explain this away before it's even released.
And there's been controversy too, because there's been like hacked emails and stuff.
Oh yes. In fact, my partner Tom Carey and I, somebody tried to hack into our home computers all within 24 hours. His system completely crashed, and no sooner than he could warn me, mine crashes the very next morning. And then there were 3 other hacks that happened with colleagues within our group before that. So we were quickly, everybody just delete everything on a computer, every email. We're going to have anything that anybody's going to have access to. So for those that think it was just such a simple matter of shopping these slides around and having all these scientists look at them and that they would all voice their opinion. Well, just imagine, Mike, the security involved. It's no different than we'd have a piece of hardware from the crash.
Sure.
You just can't, drop it in a mailbox and think it's going to arrive at the other end, or, casually get on a plane with it and think that your life, is in some way endangered. It's been quite trapeze, tight wire act for all the people involved, and I'm very proud of the fact that here we are, just a week away.
Well, how did you get called in the first place? Like, I mean, obviously, when you look up Roswell Investigator, your website, RoswellInvestigator.com.
That's precisely how it happened. That they just went online and they did some of their homework, and we were the ones that they contacted. And personally, I'm very, very pleased they did.
Well, sure. Because this is going to be a big event for you guys.
Well, the other thing is, we immediately were asked to sign statements of non-disclosure, which, would not allow us to speak out, to do interviews, talk about, the details of what was going on. We had to basically keep quiet, even to the fact that the slides existed for the first 2 years. And then as it slowly leaked out, we still had to play, mum on the situation, which really never gave us a chance to fire back and defend ourselves. But we're going to be presenting it as scientifically as possible. We regret that we're having to do it outside of this country. But as one of the scientists, he's a consultant in anthropology, as far as the Mutual UFO Network, and he told us directly, you will not find an American scientist who will give you an honest analysis about this. And isn't that sad?
Well, it's also, also though, that the the guy that's putting it on, how do you say his name again?
Jaime Maussan, yes.
Yeah, Jaime. I didn't want to say it wrong. But like he's like the Mexican Art Bell, right?
Oh, in many ways. And he actually started out, he was a Mexican correspondent for CBS 60 Minutes.
Okay.
And he's got his own TV show, and I more than once have observed, I don't care what state, even other countries, where we'll be in an airport or at a hotel, and the staff, pilots, personnel, people will just come walking up to him, and I know you, or you're that Mexican reporter, and they want to have pictures and autographs, and so he's well known as far as within the Spanish-speaking people of the world.
Well, I think that that's a great way to get obviously attention for it, and he is known as a showman. And
yes,
so,
yes.
what are you guys doing, or what do you think is the most important thing when it comes to making your case about this? Because it's going to be surrounded. You're having it on Cinco de Mayo in Mexico City. I'm
right,
sure it's going to be crazy. So, what are the most important things that you guys want to do to make sure, like, this isn't just the alien abduction videotape that's narrated by Jonathan Frakes and stuff like that?
Of course not.
So
of course.
What's the most important thing for you guys to prove?
The biggest proof, the biggest difference in all this are all the scientists, and the scientists who are brave enough not only to put their names to the reports, but are also going to be part of the event. It's not going to be the Tom Carey and Don Schmitt show. It's going to be the slides. It's going to be the scientists who are going to be making, as far as their very assessments, their analyses of what they now are convinced is, pictured in these two slides. It's not us making these statements. As I've said all along, even to my partner Tom, who is just his dissertation away from his PhD in anthropology, who am I to question you? You tell me this is something extraordinary. You tell me this is not human. And then when these other scientists all chime in, and one after one, just absolutely no one deviating from, that position.
Well, what was your moment?
Who am I to question?
What was your moment? Because, when you said, like, I've spent 25 years researching this. Roswell is what, you're known best for. When you said, like, I'm going to associate myself with this event, what was your moment when you made that decision? Like, this is the kind of thing that I can put my name behind.
Once the scientists came on board, and scientists had slowly been coming on board all along, and we just needed to solidify. We just needed to get duplicate and triplicate and quadruple, analyses on the slides. And when I started to, realize that nobody was dissenting, nobody was throwing any wrenches into the works, nobody was suggesting any alternative explanations. They just, again, from the first to the final, scientists were saying, not human, not human. Now, again, I'm not going to go so far as say, well, that proves it's alien.
Right.
But I guess what else does it leave? And if it's around that very time of Roswell, I, for one, if even in your assessment of me, Mike, if I'm going to champion Roswell, then I should also be the first one to say that, well, if we have pictures of a being that is not human from around that time period, mm-hmm. and the very people who took them resided in that area in 1947. They worked in New Mexico, and they were very close to the President of the United States thereafter. Maybe they were given such an opportunity. I can't fill in all those blanks. Nobody can. We can't prove the circumstances of how they were taken. We can't prove, as I said, that the pictures actually depict an alien being.
Right.
But nonetheless, if we were to take this into a court of law, and if a judge and jury had to sit there and weigh all of the evidence, all of the circumstances involved, and then you throw in all the scientists who are supposed to be, the foremost experts in their fields, and they say, I'm convinced that this being is not human. I guess I'm sorry. I'm not going to argue the point. I'm not gonna relish it. I'm not gonna argue it, but I'm going to at least be objective and open-minded enough to realize that it's just the beginning again of another opportunity, and either we take it and finish the job, or I allow the noisy negatives, as Stanton Friedman calls them, to rule the day, and I will not do that.
Well, that's a good attitude, and to finish up, I mean, last question, when you say finishing the job, or what you hope will come out of this kind of event, what does finishing the job mean to you?
I would love to be able to finish the Roswell investigation and get on to just some type of normal life. Get on to something much more simple like cancer research or designing a rocket ship to Mars.
Right.
It's been frustrating for lack of information, lack of solid nuts and bolts type of information that I require. I've always been a very nuts and bolts investigator. That's one of the reasons we've led the 4 archaeological projects over these years, and we're going to do a 5th one this fall. So there's another example. We have the event next week in Mexico City, and this fall we're going to do another archaeological dig. So we're also the most proactive investigators still working on this. Too many people, they sit at the keyboards and they pontificate and they judge and they criticize others who are in the trenches, who are out on the battlefield, so to speak. And I intend to finish this. And if it were strictly a case of taking the money and run, I wouldn't have spent almost a half of my life working on it.
Right.
It's hardly been that.
Well, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing the evidence coming out on, May 5th, and I'm really excited to see the slides and to see what you guys have in store. If people are interested in checking out the event or anything like that, how do they do that?
Yes, of course, and it's going to be streamed live. If you go to Be Witness, one word, bewitness.org. It will give you all the details, all the information your audience will need to stream the event. And it's going to be a full day, full evening of activity.
Well, we're certainly
beginning to end.
We're certainly looking forward to seeing the evidence and seeing what you got out there. And, of course, we'll see you at the Milwaukee Paranormal Conference in June, and we can follow up and see what the reaction has been around the world to the slides. Absolutely, because I think that's what we're most nervous about. Not what we have, not what the slides represent, but just how they'll be reacted to, what the response will be. I think the world has become so cynical, so doubtful, but then I would remind them, well, we have the government position on this situation, and then we have what the witnesses are saying. And it's about time we stop just automatically accepting what we don't want to. Well, I think I think that's absolutely true. It makes you got to question everything. Question everything, and that's one of the reasons it's taken us 3 years on the slides. And next Tuesday will, as I would say, again, will be the beginning of what continuing adventure this will provide. But it will hardly be the last word. It'll be the first word, because it'll be the first time they'll actually be presented in public. Fantastic. We look forward to it, and thank you very much for your time today, Don. We got links. My pleasure, Mike, and we'll see you in June. Look forward to it. All right. Good luck in Mexico City. Thank you so much. You bet. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
This week's track is about not killing the messenger. Inspired by the Roswell crash, this song is called Don't Shoot First.
thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.